are true for two systems of courts?
10, Mississippi.
You, the 14th. All right, Secretary of State.
Secretary of State
Deals with everything outside of America.
deals with everything outside.
Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Civics EOC Academy, where today we will be looking at political interest groups. So, last time we learned about the media's role in shaping political campaigns and the candidates and government policy, and this time we are going to finish up the same benchmark, looking at the impact that individuals and interest groups have on monitoring and influencing the government. Now, we've already spoken a few times about how important it is for regular citizens to get involved in creating the government that we have by voting and speaking out on the issues. After all, we have a Republican form of government, which means we elect representatives to run the country and the state governments. So, how can you do your part? Well, for one thing, we need people to run for office. Remember, in America, we have hundreds of thousands of elected positions. Can you imagine what would happen to our government if no one wanted to run for office? It would just stop working. And we don't just need people to run for president or for the U.S. Senate. We need people to run for mayor and town council member and superintendent of public schools. Now, since it's still a small percentage of us that will actually run for office, there's plenty of other ways that you can influence the government as an individual citizen. For one thing, you should reach out and contact your government and share your opinions. You can sign petitions or write to your elected officials, and this has become especially easy with the advent of the internet. I write emails to my elected representatives a lot, my governor, my senators, my representative in the House of Reps, and I admit it's usually to complain about something, but I just want them to know my opinions. I also sign a lot of petitions, which again has become super easy with the internet. So what else? Well, you can attend political meetings like a town council meeting or a national gathering for your political party. A great way to take part in the political process is to volunteer for a candidate who feels the same way about the issues that you do. They need people to put up signs and make phone calls and help out at events. Of course, you can always donate money to a campaign. I usually kick in about $20. And if nothing else, you better vote. Now, for those of us who want to go a step further in having our voice heard, we join what are known as interest groups. And you need to know the definition for the test. An interest group is a group of individuals with common interests who try to influence the government and what is known as public policy. Now, public policy is another word that you need to know for your exam. A policy is a plan of action to do something. And public policy is a plan that the government enacts to solve some type of problem for the people, for the public. Here we see a little flowchart about how public policy works. First, the problem has to be identified, and then research and formulation for some way to solve that problem. Next, the government will usually pass legislation to carry out this plan, and finally a review is done to see if the policy was successful, and then we move on to the next problem. So why do millions of Americans join interest groups? Well, for starters, there is what is known as strength in numbers. The government is much more likely to listen to us if we are coming to them as a group instead of just as an individual. Remember, the great thing about our government is that they work for us. If they don't do the things that we want, we'll vote for someone else. For someone who has to get elected again, a candidate has to balance the interest of the various groups to make the most possible groups happy. And this is why we join interest groups. The more people that join a group, the more the government has to listen. So there are a huge number of interest groups. Here we see a chart of the various categories for these groups. On our left, we see economic interest groups, which are probably the biggest categories of interest groups because dealing with our money is always a big concern. We see business and farming groups, labor unions, which are worker interest groups, professional associations, and on the other side we see public interest groups. These are set up to help the people. We see ideological interest groups such as religious or political. But let's take a closer look at some of these groups. Many companies and industries will start their own interest groups to try to make sure that the government is passing laws that will help their business. Besides the business owners, the workers also have their own interest groups, and these are known as labor unions. For instance, I am a member of a union that's just teachers in my city. There's also economic interest groups for people who do the same jobs, such as lawyers. And again, all of these interest groups are looking out for the financial well-being of their members. For instance, a labor union is probably going to want better wages and working conditions for its members. So a huge portion of interest groups are focused on making sure that the government helps us economically. However, there's also a large number of interest groups that are involved in just helping people. And these are known as public interest groups. Environmental groups are a great example of public interest groups. Their purpose is strictly to improve conditions for all people. And many of them, such as the Sierra Club, promote a wide range of environmental issues. Some interest groups, however, are known as single-issue groups, which means they have one goal that they focus all of their energy into. Examples would be the NRA, or National Rifle Association, and their only goal is to protect their Second Amendment rights, which ensures them the right to bear arms, which basically means own guns. Another example of a single-issue group would be MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which pretty much, as you can guess from the name, has one goal in mind, and that's to stop drunk driving. There are other groups that promote issues for a specific portion of the population, and some of their successes speak to the power of these groups. One of these is the NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And this group played a huge role in the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and it's still very active today. Another group, NOW, or the National Organization of Women, has helped promote equality for women and continues to battle for women's issues in Congress. So you might be thinking that interest groups sound very similar to political parties. And while interest groups have similar goals to political parties, they are actually different. Political parties have one goal, and that is to get their party members elected, get them into office, while interest groups will work with whatever party is more open to their ideas. And their main goal is to get laws passed. Here we see a poster that is poking fun of interest groups and the lobbyists they use, which we'll be going over in a minute, spreading money from the Republicans to the Democrats, and this is a theme that we're going to come back to in a minute. So remember, the main goal of interest groups is to influence policymakers. And by policymakers, I mean lawmakers or legislators. And there are several methods that they use to accomplish their goals. These include lobbying, electioneering, litigation, which means bringing a lawsuit against someone, and gaining public support or publicizing. And if you're taking notes, you might want to write these down. But we are going to look more closely at all of these. Let's start with electioneering, which basically means influencing elections. So as I said before, interest groups are different from political parties because their main focus is getting laws or policies passed. However, that doesn't mean that they don't favor candidates or parties in elections. Interest groups will donate large sums of monies to whatever candidate's campaign is promising to support their interests. Here we see a chart of donations to political campaigns broken down by the type of interest group and by which party they donated money to. You can see that interest groups representing finance, insurance, and real estate gave over $600 million to political campaigns. Interest groups will also publicly endorse candidates that support them, like this nurses group who are campaigning for a mayoral candidate in Chicago. Another method of influencing change is for interest groups to bring lawsuits, either against the government or a company or a person, to try to have the courts declare a law or action as unfair. Here we see a picture of the 1954 Supreme Court decision of Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education. In this lawsuit, the NAACP sued several separate school districts and were able to overturn school segregation, which separated students based on what color the child was. This is a case that we will be examining in more detail later this year, but it shows that by using the courts and litigation, interest groups can overturn unjust laws and bring about great change in our country. Interest groups also publicize the issues that they support in order to change public perception and create interest in their causes. Here we see Greenpeace trying to gain support to stop offshore drilling for oil in Alaska, or workers trying to publicize problems they are having with their employers. Without these interest groups speaking out, the people might not hear about these issues that could be important to them. Now, the biggest method that interest groups use to influence the government and get the laws passed that are important to them is lobbying. And lobbyists are people who approach government officials directly to try to influence them to pass laws that the interest groups that they represent would like to see enacted. The interest groups hire lobbyists who have connections with lawmakers. Lobbyists got their name by literally hanging out in the front hallways or lobbies of Congress and state legislatures, waiting to catch lawmakers as they walk through. They've been around for the entire history of the U.S. government. As long as our government has been passing laws, lobbyists have tried to influence the laws they make. Lobbyists set up their offices right near legislatures. There's a famous street near the U.S. Capitol called K Street, which has office building after office building filled with lobbyists. Interest groups and corporations spend billions of dollars on lobbying, as well as a ton of money contributing to the candidates. And here we see in 2013, some $3.2 billion was spent on registered lobbyists, while up to $9 billion was spent on unofficial lobbying. This picture depicts the whole lobbying world of trade associations and law firms and PR firms that is behind the scenes of the U.S. Congress trying to influence lawmakers. As you might expect, lobbying does not have the best reputation. After all, most of us can't afford to lobby our public officials. Congress is seen as taking bribes for passing laws that will help out business interests. Political cartoons such as this senator looking like a NASCAR driver with corporate sponsors, or this senator being wined and dined by a lobbyist and ignoring the voter outside, speak to the voting public's despair over not having enough influence with our elected officials. However, lobbying is not all bad. Public interest groups such as environmental organizations have lobbied Congress to pass regulations that are aimed at improving the environment or the food that we eat, laws passed to curb smoking or helping students. Lobbyists bring an expertise to lawmakers who are expected to pass laws and policies on a wide range of issues, of which they've never been trained to be experts on. These lobbyists often provide a wealth of information and often suggest what should be written into these complex laws which guide our large country of 300 million people. So, for better or worse, it's important to remember that legislatures do not pass laws in a vacuum. Individuals and interest groups play a huge role in the laws and policies that govern our country. And for your exam, you need to be familiar with just the different types of interest groups and the ways in which you can influence the government, as well as the role that these interest groups play in the political process. So let's review. Okay, so what is one thing that you can do as an individual to affect the government? Do you remember? Well, you could always run for office, petition or write your representatives, volunteer in a campaign, or attend a political meeting. Why do politicians listen to interest groups? Remember, there's strength in numbers. The more people, the more likely they are to listen. What do you call an interest group of workers who fight for better wages and working conditions? They're a labor union. What is an interest group formed to help the people? Remember, it's not economic interest group. It's a public interest group. What's the difference between a political party and an interest group? A political party is only focused on getting their candidates elected, Well, an interest group wants to get laws passed that are going to help their members. What methods do interest groups use to influence the government? Well, they hire lobbyists, publicize the issues, bring lawsuits against the government or companies, that's called litigation, and they help officials get elected. What do you call the people who go directly to the lawmakers to try to influence them to pass the laws? Remember, the interest groups hire these people and they hang out in the front hallway. They're called lobbyists. Okay, well, I want to thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to subscribe. Attention teachers, that this PowerPoint with a variety of lesson plans and activities is available for $1.99 at Teachers Pay Teachers. Just search for Mr. Raymond's Civics EOC Academy. Keep up the good work, guys, and you're going to ace that test.